Listen, I know why most of you are here. You want to know how to deal with shurikens. So I'm giving Mithrix 1000 shurikens and 1000 alien heads, so it'll be a constant stream of shuriken when he shoots. I'm going to show you the secret strat to overcome it. Yeah, well, you walk in a circle. Hurts my heart to see people scrap shurikens because they fear it in Phase 4. It follows the same path as the needles, which is something they should be avoiding anyway, so be afraid no longer. While circling and using cover around the arena solve the majority of all popular problematic Phase 4 issues, it doesn't solve all of them, and I know some people definitely feel cheated by this phase as a whole. We have a lot to cover today, but let's dive into Phase 4's interesting technical side first, so we can share a basic understanding of the mechanics underneath the hood. But if you're here looking for something specific, I have some section timestamps on screen for you here. Item steal mechanic is slightly more complex than I think a lot of people give it credit for. Mithrix doesn't use all of your items due in part to either his ban list, his item limit, and loosely his second HP bar. Ban list is really easy and really quick to cover. These are a few items he just isn't allowed to use because frankly it's too unfair to the player. Stack as many of these as you want with no repercussions, and keep in mind he also can't sprint, so these are soft bans. His item limit is a little bit more interesting though. Strangely enough, Mithrix can only use 37 unique items. This is because the theft is tied to the animation pulling your items to him, and it has a limit on how long this animation can play. So the animation lasts for 37 different items stolen. Obviously, this doesn't mean you get to keep the rest, but neither does he. In fact, you don't even get these lost items back from him until he dies. The only items in play between the two of you for the rest of the phase are the 37. To know which items he's going to use, count 37 backwards in reverse chronological order from the last unique item stack you picked up to the first. Every item before this point on your item bar will become the lost. When you damage him and take your items back, you get these 37 in chronological pickup order. This means there's a chance for some unique macro strategy here. Counting your items stage 5, you can actually control which items you get back first, or items that he won't be able to use at all. Example, let's say you had goat hooves near the start of your item list. You can decide whether you want this item in Phase 4 or not. Make sure it's included in the 37 by maybe scrapping a few items, etc., or choose to pick up more items to push it out of the 37 completely. You can also control whether it's the first item you get back or not by leaving it as the 37th itself. This is usually a great option for damage items to accelerate the phase faster. There are a lot of ways you can affect this with macro, item pickup, scrapping theory, and build management order, so get really creative. This is really interesting stuff. Now on to his second HP bar. You might be thinking, what second HP bar? Well, Mithrix has two. Let's separate these bars, the visible and the hidden. The visible HP bar works as any HP bar in the game does. The hidden bar is the one that controls you getting your items back at certain intervals, and it can also not be healed. Once damaged, the hidden bar will stay at its current value until damaged again, which, frankly, this means that healing items don't really matter for Mithrix. He can have 1,000 medkits and planal and rejuvenation racks and repulsion armor plates, but as long as you're doing any amount of damage, you'll get your items back eventually. And when you get them back, you win. This was done to prevent softlocks, and it does a great job of it. I often see players worried about being stuck here forever, fighting an ultimate healing god, but Mithrix just makes a good show of it, so no need to worry. Let's circle back to general strategy and movement before we cover specific counters to troublesome items and characters, so we have a baseline of how to react to those situations when they come up. First thing to note is that you have to assume if you get hit once, you die. More than ever in this game, this phase stresses on how important it is to dodge. Not dodging equals death. Like I said before, circling is king. Preferably as far away from him as your character allows you while being able to deal damage, whether that means right up close or at the edge of the arena. You can continue to run and strafe one direction, his shots will always trail behind you, unless he decides to do this weird spin around thing and shoot ahead of you. This is an issue specifically with the first part of the phase where Mithrix shoots only needles, and you can counter this by circling clockwise in this section. He likes to spin around like an ice skater more often if you circle counterclockwise, which can definitely mess you up. Remember, go clockwise. If you're up close, sometimes it's helpful to jump because he likes to shoot at your feet. It's important not to change directions and double back on yourself. You'll almost always get hit if you do this. If you feel hard-pressed to do that out in the open, circling around a pillar can be a good idea. You can be a perfectly reasonable player and focus on taking cover from the all-powerful god. Circling and committing to a direction when you both peek each other out of cover, though, is important. And if you ever stand still, double back, or re-peek, when he peeks, you'll probably die. Listening for the needles when in cover is great, but it's a good habit to wide peek and commit to it anyway. Also, something I like doing if I find myself behind cover is turning my camera to the side enough to where I see a red dot through the wall, showing me where he is. It's very, very easy to kite him around a pillar. Just try to stay opposite to him and look for a sightline. When you have drones and other allies, which we'll talk more about later, Mithrix will alter his aim sometimes to be between both targets. It's very weird and it can trip you up a lot, so this is something to watch out for. Strafe away from the drones always. The closer you get, the more off his aim can get. So while it's great to be able to know how to dodge his attacks, you still need to do damage to win. So in between his needle volleys, keep rotating and take a few shots at him. If there's very little downtime, you can jump forward during your rotation and flick for some free damage. Most characters won't need to do this, but you should be able to know how. You can throw attacks around pillars if you kite him around a bit too. Don't be greedy, you can chip down his second HP bar and win no matter what. The best approach though is to do as much damage as your character allows immediately. He sits in the middle for a while after stealing your life savings, enough time for most characters and builds to get a few items back for free. This is a huge bonus if you've played your macro correctly and you set yourself up for good items back first. Be careful though, I've seen way too many people greed this section and end up just getting blasted and die before the phase can even begin. Alternatively, you might be able to do enough damage to skip the first section of the phase and move on to orbs immediately. Now do all that and you should get to the HP threshold where Mithrix starts slamming orbs, which means congratulations, you win. He'll damage himself whenever he does this move, so you get a lot of items back for free, and the less healing he has, the more he'll continue to do this attack. So most of the time, you can just sit back and watch him end the phase for you once it begins. A lot of people still struggle with the orbs though, so while he's down slamming the floor, it would be a good idea to start rotating counterclockwise, the opposite direction the orbs are traveling. Because he pauses to do the slam, he'll do the weird spin less often, especially in Eclipse. Counterclockwise here becomes safer. It's easier to dodge an orb when you can see it coming towards you in front of you, as opposed to jumping at the right time as it swings at you from behind. Which, by the way, is a habit you will develop over time. Fun tip though, if you keep backup mags in the 37 items, he will actually use it for this move, and slam orbs multiple times in a row when he initially enters that part of the phase. That means he deals more self-damage and opens up a larger window for you to deal damage. That's a great way to get a lot of items back quickly. But by far the best counter to anything Mithrix can do in Phase 4 is honestly a damaging equipment. One of these bad boys can allow you to stay far away and get the big burst of damage you need to immediately get a chunk of your items back, which wins you the phase. Capacitor being the Phase 4 ace. The downside is you have to sacrifice a color skip equipment for one of these, so this is a choice you're going to need to make a little bit early on. Evaluate your run and decide for yourself, although with good circling and cover habits you shouldn't really need to rely on this, but it is the best. So, back to counters, and while he does have a limited item pool, some of which inevitably he won't be able to use well, there are some troublesome items to watch out for. Notably, about half of these items I'm deeming troublesome are so because of allies and the interactions here. Mithrix proccing something off of a drone or a ruler knight or your friend to kill you feels pretty bad to be honest, so I try my best to get away from my allies as fast as I can once the phase begins. Being chained by Uke, Meat Hook, or a Tesla bounce off of a drone or hit by AoE like Void Scent, Gas, and Wisp can lead to instant death. If Mithrix focuses on your ally instead of you, he can even start throwing out ATGs that can seek you, which is very cool. So making sure a pillar is between you and him is recommended if you're worried about this stuff, at least until the allies die and sometime after to make sure there aren't any more missiles headed your way. Tesla is a pretty infamous one, but while scary, I don't think it's as bad as its reputation. It has a long cooldown, which leaves a lot of openings for attacks and retreats, and as long as you work to stay away from him with range by the time that cooldown pops, you'll be okay. Making him walk around pillars is generally a very good idea because the radius of the shocks can't reach you through the wall, so pretty easy. Even though it follows a similar strategy, Nuka-Hana's is more destructive in Mithrix's hand. The downtime you're allotted with Tesla is no longer there, and since Planula and Medkit can power it up extremely well, it can create a situation where as a melee or close range survivor, you can essentially get screwed. This is one item I recommend taking a second to fully consider whether you can actually deal with the effects phase 4, preferably from range, and if you can't, then make sure it isn't in the 37. Alien Head is one we saw a peek at earlier. Allowing Mithrix to essentially shoot non-stop is honestly a bit scary. Some characters with larger hitboxes and slower acceleration can find this pretty oppressive, but circling or pillar peeking can overcome it, but it definitely makes the fight a lot harder. Behemoth is also a little scary sometimes, but for the most part, jumping so he doesn't hit the ground under you and staying off inclines and away from walls doesn't really make this too much of a big deal. Since the explosion doesn't have a proc coefficient either, taking a few bits of AoE won't always kill you. Empathy cores actually can be scary. Best tip, stay away as best you can, but they're faster than you. Equipment usually is the solution to this. Pillar skip equips can allow you to stay away while you damage Mithrix, like staying far enough above, like on the top of pillars, will not allow them to see you, and obviously damaging equips can end the fight. But if you find yourself in a position where they caught up to you, tighter circles work, cut in sharper to try to avoid the laser. If you try and play the long game with empathy cores on Eclipse 8, you might lose. Try to end the fight quick. Be careful when they spawn, as they do on top of Mithrix. Try to use your cores as bait for them if they're alive. This may be an item you think about taking out of the 37 if you feel it doesn't help your build and you have no way of handling them with your build/loadout. Queen's Gland we can mention since we did empathy cores. Beetle guards are tougher to deal with than phase 4 needles, surprisingly, but again, keep your circles up and you should be good. If you can't deal a lot of damage and are really scared of them, get them low enough to where they run at you so you don't have to deal with dodging another projectile line. Zoea usually isn't a problem, and the ads take a long time to spawn, and you should have maybe one of your own left over. If he spawns one, hope it isn't a jailer. If it is, hide behind walls so you don't get pulled and paralyzed. Speed sometimes makes Mithrix very fast and very scary. If you're worried about him running you down and you feel like he simply has too much speed to kite around him, use one of the pillars. Sometimes he'll even get stuck at one and be unable to move. And last one, safer spaces. I think this is actually the only item in the game currently that can really actually soft lock you and end your run. For some reason, Mithrix is allowed to have enough of these stacked up so that you have to deal damage to him like twice in less than a second. Very cool. Lots of characters cannot deal with that, so this is just something you have to think about. Can you deal with it? Usually it isn't a problem unless you loop a lot, since you need about 25 of these to get to that point, and since it's a void item, you can't get rid of them either. So think about your intake of them, and about skipping phase 4 for this one if you're on a character that can have trouble. But all of that being said, wouldn't it be nice to just not do the phase at all? The most exciting tech, and probably the most requested to talk about, that we found is the ability to skip phase 4 completely and not do it at all. I'm not going to go into every skip, but I'm going to go over the skip mechanics with a few examples, and you should be able to find your own skips with items and abilities as you play and practice. So how does the skip work? You've probably seen it happen before and assume, like most players do, oh wow, I had so much damage, I skipped the phase. Not to take that away from you, but you didn't. What happened is you hit Mithrix with something that did just enough damage on the first frame of him spawning into phase 4, which stuns him out of the invulnerability and the Atom Steal animation. Which sounds hard, but it's actually pretty easy to do, and there's a lot of cool setups for it. Mithrix obviously spawns in the same spot for phase 4 every single time, so we can use that. We know where he's going to be, and we control when, because we can choose when to kill him. By far the easiest and most consistent skip in the game is using the Jarro's Band. If you activate the band on him when he jumps to the center of the arena, and then kill him while the AoE effect is still there, he will spawn into the band at the start of phase 4, which does enough damage in a fast enough interval to skip him every single time. Very, very easy and very controllable. If you're looking for the flashier route of trying to hit him with an ability or item, usually things that are projectiles make it easier. If the attack can spend more time in the air flying through his hurtbox, the more likely you are to skip the phase. Things like shurikens or loader's punch, for example. The more you have to rely on a frame-perfect hit scan shot, the more likely you're just going to have to rely on going through phase 4 normally. Definitely play around with this. There are a lot of confirmed ways to skip, but the more obscure ones can be difficult to pull off. I was going to do a character section here, but just about every character plays similarly enough at their core, so at the end of the day, if you know what to watch out for and you use the things we've talked about here, you can get through. Most of the character tips involve getting your damage in early anyway. I hope that if you were scared of Phase 4 before this video, you can walk away feeling bolstered and more confident about your fights in the future. A lot of this just comes down to experience and practice and memorization, so if you forget one of the more niche dangers and get yourself killed, view it as a learning experience. Practice circles and practice skips. Thanks for watching until the end. If you want another guide of mine about macro itemization in this game, you can click here. Otherwise, I'll be around here on YouTube and on Twitch making Risk of Rain content, so good luck and I'll see you guys around.